Cloud is basically one or more servers that is owned by another company in a different location, and you can work on that. It can also run services, but I'm going to talk more about that later. You have no control over the hardware. That is a good and a bad thing, because you don't have to worry about the hardware, but you can't really do anything with it. Most cloud providers use a pay-as-you-go model, so you only pay when and if you use something. Shared resources means it's all maybe on one server, and there are 3 people using that server, but you all have different sections that you can use and edit and so on. You can access the cloud over the internet. That is also a good and a bad thing, because it can cause some security issues if you don't encrypt the traffic, but it's accessible from everywhere. The servers are also scalable because you can choose how many resources you want. If you need more, you just click a few buttons and you have more. If you don't need it, you just remove it. You don't have to physically get more servers. Now, what is AWS? AWS stands for Amazon Web Services, and it's a cloud provider. As the name implies, it's owned by Amazon. It's by far the largest cloud provider, with over 30% of the web traffic going through AWS. I've seen some numbers over 40%, but I don't really know if that's true or not. It also uses a pay-as-you-go model, but I already explained that. It uses services, which I'm going to explain right now. So AWS has many services. I'm going to explain a few here, and it's just simple storage. So you have many options for databases. Elastic Beanstalk is just for hosting web apps and so on. It's pretty important, but I'm not going to go into more detail into that. And there are over 200 more services. I don't have the time or the knowledge to say more about that. So now EC2. EC2, like I said, is just a virtual machine in the cloud. If you don't know, a virtual machine is basically a virtual PC that runs on another PC. It acts like its own device, but it isn't. It's just virtual. It's also isolated from the host device, so it's pretty much its own thing. You can run pretty much anything on it. As an example, I chose AI development because it needs a lot of resources to do that. And you can easily just give your EC2 instance these resources so you can maybe train a model on it. Data processing is also very, very good on EC2 because you can dynamically change how many resources it can use and not, because data processing is very variable in terms of power consumption. Like I said, it's pretty flexible. So if you need more resources, with a few clicks, you can add more instances, add more cores, more RAM, everything. And if you don't need it, you just remove it. There's also auto-scaling, which does that automatically. So if you host something on there, and all of a sudden, instead of 10 users, you have 10,000, it just adds more instances automatically, adds more resources, and if the traffic goes down again, it just removes them. It also is highly available because an EC2 instance isn't just on one server, it's in many different data centers in many different locations. So if one burns down, as an example, it just uses the one in a different data center and copies it to another one that still works. So S3 is also very important in AWS. It's pretty basic. You just store files in it in so-called buckets, but it's pretty similar to any other file storage provider. You can access the files if you need them through names and IDs, and it offers a fast file retrieval if you need it. But if you don't, you just can choose a cheaper option that is pretty slow, but it's cheap and you can store data. So Lambda is pretty much just running scripts in the cloud in many languages like JavaScript, C#, PowerShell, and so on, many more. You can automate every action pretty much in the cloud. Like as an example, in the exam we had last week, it would send an email every time something new was added to the database. And Lambda was pretty much in the middle of that. It noticed when something was added and then sent the data that it would send through the email to another service that then sent the email. It's a part of serverless computing, which is kind of misleading because it still needs servers, but you don't have to physically interact with them. So now to the alternatives. Does anyone know the second and the third most used cloud provider?
I think Azure and Google Cloud.
Yes. Azure is the second most used with about, I've seen 20% of the web traffic going through Azure. And the third most is Google Cloud Platform with about 10%. So they're behind AWS by a bit. They're all three viable choices, but AWS is by far the most used and has the most feature overall. So now the pros and cons. So the pros and cons in terms of a cloud or having physical servers. The pros are it needs less effort because you don't have to physically go through the servers, fix them, look after them. It's also efficient because you only use these resources that you need. So if you have your own data center and you have 10,000 users and you have enough servers for that, but your product isn't used anymore by people, you still have the 10,000 the servers that run, use energy, cost you money, but they aren't needed. So it would be a lot of effort to replace them, add new ones, remove them. So the cloud automates that because it's all managed by Amazon. It's generally a lower cost option because, as I said, you don't need physical servers, you don't need people managing them. And it's also scalable, like I said before. The cons are you have basically no control over the hardware. So if they change something, you can't really do anything about it, and you are dependent on them. So if you want to change from AWS to Azure, as an example, it's going to be pretty hard because it's designed in a way that you need it, and it's almost impossible to get all the data, transfer it to Azure, and search for a comparable service. That was my presentation. Do you have any questions?
The host for what? Any questions?
Any questions?
I don't think there are any questions.
All right. So yeah, well done.
Does anyone want to give feedback? Just give it to someone.
Yeah.
You're never here, so you can give
I
feedback.
literally answer these questions for you. Give it
Yes.
to him.
You can hold it. Just say anything.
Let me think real quick. I really like that you also compare the other providers, and you explain like how it's difficult to switch. And maybe talk a bit louder and more like be more confident. You can use hand gestures or whatever you want, like show something and visualize like that. But overall, I found a good presentation.
a second person. Do you?
I think in general your design of the presentation is pretty much well done, in my opinion. Also, you put the information about generally what the cloud is pretty simple and easy and well easy to understand, and I think overall still it's a good presentation. The only thing is how to get to us, sort of like your body language needs to a bit more change, but besides that, presentation is good.
Thanks. It's a wrap.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.